Welcome to Truth Wanted. We search for proof of gods, ghosts, aliens, or any other questionable claims, but we haven't found it yet. Do you have the evidence we've been looking for? Well, then call us because the show is starting right now. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Truth Wanted. I am your host, ExXtian Erin, and this is the live call-in show that happens every single Friday at 7 p.m. Central Time, where we talk to people about what they believe and why. If you'd like to call us, you can at 1-512-991-9242 or through your computer at tiny.cc/call-TW. Truth Wanted is a product of the Atheist Community of Austin, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to the promotion of atheism, critical thinking, secular humanism, and the separation of religion and government. And as always, we like to have a special guest on with us every Friday. And today I am so excited because my guest is Christy Powell. Hi, Christy.
Howdy. Yeah, super excited to be back. I feel very overdue, but it's nice kind of making the rounds.
Yeah, I'm really glad to have you on tonight. I mean, we have worked together in the past, but it's been a little while. Where have people seen you before? You look familiar.
Yeah. Well, so I'm on Talk Heathen on a regular basis now. But before that, I was the host and producer of Secular Sexuality for I guess 4.5 years, almost 5 years with the ACA, and had an incredible opportunity to talk to all kinds of people about all different sorts of gender and sexuality and different ways to love and connect and to be. And we have put that show on hiatus for the moment. We're hoping to maybe bring it back possibly at the end of the summer. And I'm just excited to still be I guess part of the ACA and to take a little break so I can do shows like this.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're still hanging out with us, even though we've kind of put that other show on the back burner for now.
Mm-hmm.
I was lucky enough to come and join you in that program as well, and I got to join in for a few months before we decided to just put it off for a little bit so we can maybe regroup and make it even better if we can. But first, we talked a little bit earlier. It's been maybe a year or so since you've been on the show.
Sure. Yeah.
So for anybody who has been watching and maybe hasn't seen your face before, do you want to give us a little bit of background about how did you get involved with this? How did you get involved in activism and hosting shows and putting your face on the internet and talking about things?
Yeah, I mean, if it had happened at any other moment in my life, I don't know that it would have happened at all. And so I'm super glad that the ACA found me. But I am a licensed professional counselor here in Austin, Texas. And at one point, I was at a point in my career where I was happy to just be working for exposure. I was just starting out and still finishing up my graduate work. And I think that the ACA really just knew that they wanted to do a sex show. They didn't really know exactly what that should look like or what it would be, but they knew that sexuality is one of the biggest places that religion has an impact. It's one of the greatest sites of religious trauma, and religion loves to sort of insert itself between the things that our body desperately craves and us. So when religion comes in and says you can't eat this, or you can't, work on these days, or you can't have sex in that way, it makes us dependent on religion.
Right.
So we knew doing a sex show was important. I think honestly, there were some higher ups that just kind of Googled Austin sex group ? And eventually they found
and your name popped up.
well, they found a great local organization that I had been actively sucking up to for a couple of months at that point. I think I had shaken the right hands and eventually got introduced to the ACA, and as a brand new baby therapist who was an atheist, but wasn't an atheist activist, and wasn't necessarily wanting to tie my name and my reputation to, baby eating and flag burning and other terrible things that atheists do. I was a little nervous, but I came down to the Free Thought Library and got to know some folks, and just found a lot of passion for the work that we're doing here. So I've been almost 5 years now doing this.
Wow. Yeah. It's interesting for me to hear your background story. Like I deconverted about 4 years ago,
Mm,
and like you said, like sexuality and like that kind of area, I think it affects pretty well everybody, right? Everybody,
yeah.
and then
I
when
mean,
you're coming out
sex
of
isn't just a sin, it's a sin against one's own body. It's
right,
especially sinful in the words of Paul.
right, and I think I was probably 6 months or so into my like deconversion or deconstruction, however you like, like to frame that, until I started to realize like, oh, I had this like a whole other area that it was like a whole different category that I need to
Mm,
look at.
yeah.
And so for me, I found I was already kind of watching ACA programs, and then when I started watching secular sexuality, like I binged it. Like I thought this is a program that everybody needs to listen to if you've been involved in any kind of, you know, strict religion, or like, just even just a very conservative background in that area where you haven't had that opportunity to kind of develop how you think about these things, or getting to know yourself. There's so many little things about it. So I became like a huge fan of the show, and I would recommend it to a lot of people when I was in my early days of activism as well. Where people are looking for resources, I would constantly be like, you should check out these programs, because there's this whole kind of pocket of deconversion that is not, there's not a lot of things out there for it. So
Yeah.
I mean, I still agree that there's this huge need for it to go on, and I agree that we're going to make it even better in the future. So I was really happy that I got to work with you on that show as well. So I hope that it just continues to grow in that area. And I mean, there's probably more areas that we haven't thought of yet too going
Oh,
forward. Like
yeah.
as we kind of grow as a whole group, like there's probably more needs in different little areas that we need to address still for people coming out of religion.
Unquestionably. I
Yeah.
mean, religion does touch every corner of our lives, but I really am of the opinion that sexuality is one of those places that we don't even know what we're missing oftentimes. I
Hmm.
mean, when we were doing secular sexuality, people would kind of constantly ask, like, well, so is this a gay show? Like, is it specifically for queer folks? And yeah, I mean, there was a fair bit of that kind of content because that is obviously a place where religion, especially in this moment right now, is sort
Right.
of banging its hammer. I mean, this last week here in Austin, we saw ridiculous legislation get sort of shouted down, and there's still a lot of talk about banning our access to gender affirming care, banning our access to drag shows, to all kinds of like kind of valuable or important forms of expression. But even people who feel like, you know what, I am straight, I am married, I am monogamous, I, have my
Mhm.
sexuality all figured out. I say to you, like, good for you, but also I kind of don't believe that we as a society are really there. We
Yeah.
have, I mean, every single magazine is, 10 ways to spice things up in the bedroom or how to get the sex that you're craving. We're thinking about sex and talking about sex all the time because we don't like our sex lives.
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes we don't even sort of realize what we're missing out on or what the deficit is there.
100%. Yeah. I'm just like so on board with what you're talking about. I've been married. We've had our, I guess we're coming up on 12 years now, which
Mm,
just like seems crazy to me. But um I was married before I deconverted, and I'm still married to the same guy now. And we've been happy. Everything's, it's all intents and purposes, it's been good. There's still a lot of things that I've discovered about myself in the last few years
sure.
because I've removed the framework of religion out of my mindset and the way that I'm viewing things. So just the opportunity to kind of reassess something that's already good and make it better. I think that was kind of what it became for me, looking into that whole area. So whether it was just looking at more evidence-based things about sexuality and like the things I just wasn't taught because there wasn't a good sexual education, or just these more kind of niche things that I just had never thought about. I mean, that's a whole other area that I think is really important for everybody to look at. I mean, even if you've never been religious and you've just grown up in public school, like there's a very big lack of sexual education, and that sort of thing just in general in North America. So I think a program like that, or someone like you, a host like you, is invaluable to this kind of work that we do. So
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, even 10 years ago, the word trans or transgender was something that people would sort of like stumble on and not really
Right.
know what it means. And yeah, now it feels like trans folks are in the news every single day. And I'll just not not meaning to speak on behalf of that community, but I'll say that that's not the goal. We're not in the news because we want to be in
Right.
that sense. But it is so important that we recognize that there are so many different aspects of our humanity that have just been repressed and pushed aside and ignored for generations and generations.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we could probably just, and we have had whole shows about this.
Yeah, no question.
Like this is an endlessly important and fascinating conversation. But let's kind of gear our way towards what we're going to talk about this week. If anybody's watching and you have questions about this stuff, I mean, we've got Christy here. Let's
Gender and sexuality,
yeah.
religious trauma. I'd love to talk about kind of psychology in a more general sense about, the phenomenology of the soul or the self or consciousness or whatever. And we can talk about psychedelic therapies. We can talk about Buddhist psychology and all of these different kinds of things. So I'm excited for some calls tonight.
Right. And speaking of that, we do have a poll question for our audience tonight.
Mhm.
And the question is, are psychedelics a good pathway to God? And I would love to hear people's, background and thoughts about that, because I think that's an interesting one. It opens a whole can of worms about that.
Oh, no question.
Subjective experiences and what we, and people have all sorts of, even in the atheist community, there's different viewpoints about what psychedelics are and what is happening during that whole experience. So I would love to have some calls in about that. We do have some lines open still. So if you'd like to, call in and have a longer conversation with us, call in early. The number is, again, 1-512-991-9242. And you can call through your computer at tiny.cc/call-TW. So last week, before we kind of get into our calls, last week we had a question of the week. We want the truth, or as we like to call it, WWTT. We just need to get those little bracelets,
I love that.
Last week, we asked you, the audience, create a useless conspiracy theory. And we said we would choose our top 3 favorites and tell everybody in the audience. So last week, our favorite 3 are, starting with number 3, from Brinster Media. Useless conspiracy theory. The McRib is always brought back to distract the public from getting too close to discovering the truth.
I'm so ready to believe that. Absolutely.
Right. I've actually never had a McRib. I don't know what the hype is.
You're absolutely missing out. I actually wrote like 10 years ago when my partner first became internet famous and like the whole idea of being on YouTube and everything was absolutely foreign to me. I wrote this like long diatribe about how incredible the McRib was that went kind of vaguely viral in my small town. So I'm very passionate about this topic.
I did not know that. That's hilarious.
It's not how I introduce myself usually. Like Christy Powell, therapist, McRib aficionado.
Yeah, big fan of that. That's funny. Okay, and then number 2 from Chuck Gados. Sorry, I'm probably saying that not the right way. Useless conspiracy theory. The original lunar landing mission went off course and landed on Mars by mistake. To avoid embarrassment, NASA reshot the landing footage in a film studio.
I mean,
it's
like, yeah, Stanley Kubrick could have been involved. Like, it makes sense. I'd buy it.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one. And our number 1 favorite answer this week, and I am so on board for this one, from Rebecca Borg. Useless conspiracy theory. The handbag industry has blackmailed the dress industry to produce only pocketless dresses.
Oh man, 100%.
100%.
Well, they're the same industry, right? I mean, by and large, like who's making handbags but not dresses, vice versa? There's something to that.
Yeah, the phenomenon of finding a dress that has pockets. Yeah. I can't describe. My wedding dress had pockets, and I'm pretty sure that's the reason why I chose it, because I was thrilled that I could carry my, my lipstick or whatever I needed in the moment in there. So I 100% agree that there's something fishy going on there, and we need to look into that a little bit more. So the prompt for this week is, I'm going to ask you, Christy, what you think too. Our question of the week, we want the truth, is what do aliens shame each other over?
having to pull over on a like backwater planet to ask for directions.
Oh God, yeah, that's good. Yeah, and is it like all genders are embarrassed about it? They shame it, or is it just
I mean,
specifically?
I would like to think if you have intergalactic travel that you are beyond basic misogyny, but you know what? I'm not going to make any assumptions about these folks we haven't met.
That's right. Yeah, I was just thinking, just they probably shame each other about believing in humans.
Yeah, fair to say.
Like, you believe in humans? They have no evidence for that, or it's possible, but you actually believe in it. And like, there's these stories going around about people who, get pulled out of their sleep to talk to humans, and we need to talk to them about our problems at Starbucks or whatever. Like, there's got to be something going on there. That's what I was thinking. So if you have a great idea about what aliens shame each other over, please write it in the comments of the video below. And if we like your comment, we will post the top 3 next week.
Mm-hmm.
All right. All right. So before we get into our next calls here, actually, we do have a call on the line. I'd love to talk to you right now. Are you ready to hop in?
Yeah, sure. If you're ready to go, let's do it.
All right. Let's talk to... Oh, I'm sorry. Give me 1 second here. I don't have a name here, but we will. I'll check back in a second. Okay, obviously we've forgotten to do the patron of the day, so let's get to that instead. Because I think I am going to get to this call because it's directly with what we're talking about, but I messed it up and I will get back to that in a second.
Fair enough.
So every single week here, before we get into the calls, usually, unless you're confused like me, we like to shout out a patron of the week. One of the best ways to support our program here is through Patreon. And so we like to choose one special patron every single week. And this week's special patron is Garrett AJ. So thank you so much, Garrett. We really appreciate your contribution into making this whole thing happen. I mean, it takes a lot of resources and time and effort, and your contribution is really, really greatly appreciated. So if anyone else in the audience is looking for a way to support us, go to tiny.cc/Patreon TW. That is one of the best ways to directly impact what we do here. Okay. Well, I'm still not getting through to that one here. All right.
Well, let me ask you
about psychedelics a bit more.
Yeah, I was going to say, if we're kind of curious about that topic, and we've got a couple of calls already coming in on that idea. I mean, you don't have to talk too much about your personal experiences, but like, what is your interest in psychedelics?
Psychedelics did have an impact, we'll say, on me during my deconversion process. I mean, I am Canadian. It's decriminalized here. There is a little bit of a different process here. So I may or may not have had a few experiences a few years ago with just some, casual kind of things like that. And I remember also experimenting with things that are non-substance related, but have a similar kind of impact. So things like meditation.
You and I were talking a little bit about evangelicalism or hardcore Protestantism. And there's a piece there. I'll let you keep going.
There is a connection there. I grew up in a Pentecostal church, so there was a lot of this really like literally hands-on kind of emotional experiences. The whole idea of having this surreal encounter with the Holy Spirit was really emphasized. So for me, I had already I was in my doubting, kind of questioning era, but experimenting with gentle things, substances that are decriminalized in Canada, and also with meditation and things like lucid dreaming and just these really intense kind of mind states that I was kind of exploring at the time. And if you look at my story, I went into that, kind of did fall down a different rabbit hole for a while, but not very long. It was really, really informative for me because I realized that I could have these transformational experiences that had absolutely nothing to do with church or being in service or even being in prayer or anything like that.
Yeah.
I think that when I hear people talking about their experiences, I can see very clearly the connection of this. Some people will call it like their ego death, or these experiences where they're taken outside of themselves and they experience something external to them. How similar that was for me growing up in the church as well.
Yeah, no, so on Secular Sexuality, we actually had the opportunity to interview a former worship minister, worship leader,
Hmm.
who talked in detail about some of the kind of manipulative strategies around, how to make sure to play just the right music at just the right time with just the right lighting to really evoke these like powerful emotional experiences.
Yeah.
And honestly, that idea was the biggest thing that made my faith come tumbling down. Like reading about psychedelics and particularly reading about hypnosis and beginning to understand the different ways that we could intentionally occasion these experiences uh, helped me recognize that, like, okay, these personal experiences that I had that really brought me into my faith and that made me feel very connected to God were
Mhm.
all things that can be artificially induced and don't need to have the particular weight that I was giving them. I mean,
Right.
these can still be really transformative experiences even after we understand where they're coming from. But just because we don't understand something that's going on inside of our bodies or inside of our minds doesn't mean like dot 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 therefore God, you know?
Right. Yeah, I can relate to the whole music worship pastor thing. Not that I was a leader, but I used to play bass guitar, if you can believe it. I used
Mm.
to play bass and I was on the worship band. And I remember feeling like I had this intense power over the audience because when the bass dropped, that's when also the Holy Spirit would drop. And
Oh,
it was
100%.
palpable. You could feel it. I mean, I still am like I like bass. Bass gives me like that goosebumps that phenomenon where I feel really like um just you get that overall feeling of like I'm just alive inside kind of. I still really love
Yeah.
bass. And I still use it as like kind of a therapeutic reasons. Like it's calming to me. I
100%. I mean,
can
look
like lie
into
down and listen to some really good bassy music and like it's calming. So I mean, I kind of understand it, but that was probably one of the first like notches in that, that rope of things that broke apart for me eventually because I was like,
mm,
why am I so powerful here of this like just this young person playing the bass guitar with my three chords or whatever that you play. um seeing
yeah.
how that really like affected people like right in front of me and even just seeing it from the other side too, being on the stage and watching out in the audience and feeling some disconnect between what they were experiencing and like what we were doing because what we were doing on the stage is very like it's a performance, right?
Hanging out
And
with the worship band was a big part of me kind of going like, oh, wait, what we
yeah,
think of as, these people who are dedicated to God, maybe they are, maybe they aren't for whatever that's worth.
yeah,
But yeah, music is really powerful in the way it affects our psychology. Uh,
definitely.
some of your viewers might be familiar with Stephen Porges and polyvagal theory, which is a pretty fascinating notion. But he actually has a particular therapy. It's called the Safe and Sound Protocol, where there are a number of different sounds that you can actually play to kind of trigger emotional experiences at various frequencies. And obviously that can get into some kind of woo-woo pseudoscience
There's
territory
a
pretty
thin line,
quickly.
yeah,
There is
but
a thin line, but there's some
mhm.
valid research in that direction that is pretty fascinating.
Oh, totally. And I remember one of the things that I had looked into, which I found like it worked for me, was the bilateral. I think it's called. Um, oh, it's like the bilateral beats, the movement or
Binaural
the
beats.
sound. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
binaural. What do you call it? By
I think binaural is, maybe I'm not pronouncing that
I
right. I don't
think
know.
it's something. Yeah,
If you
it's
type
something like
that word into YouTube, you will
yes,
get all kinds of crazy shit. Some of it
right.
is goofy, some of it is fun, some of it can actually be kind of sexy and exciting.
Yeah,
None of it is magic, but a lot of
none
it
of
claims
it.
to
Yeah,
be.
and so I'm one of those people where those things work on me. So like if I put the headphones on, if I like, close my eyes or I'm in a dark room and I've got this sensation of the music going back and forth between the headphones, like it's pretty cool. And it does have like this really big impact on your body as well, like
Yeah.
your system, right? So I mean, those are all things that I think are really useful if we're talking about therapeutic reasons. So for calming your nervous system or for people who are experiencing overwhelm or things like that, like those can be really good things that you have in your toolbox for like handling things like anxiety and
Absolutely.
stress and learning and that kind of thing. So I think that it's a good thing for people to understand too. And like you said, music is really powerful. one of my big moments was going to a concert and crying at a concert because I was just like, it's my favorite band or whatever. I loved it. And being like, I had this impulse to like raise my hands almost because I'm just so into this. And I was like, that's blasphemous, if anything. And realizing like, oh, there's something just going on here that can happen outside of all the different frameworks. So, I mean, maybe a little less magic and more just a cool phenomenon that happens in the human brain.
Yeah, and you know what? Magic, supernatural, I mean, fuck, I don't really care what we call it. Like, I am a empiricist and a materialist, and I'm not trying to promote the notion that anything that can't be rigorously and scientifically evaluated is somehow real. But, whatever word we want to use, music is magical. Chanting is incredibly powerful. There's so many practices that we see in religious communities that obviously have an incredible effect. Otherwise, people wouldn't be using them. Otherwise, people wouldn't be religious. And we don't need to assume that like Sky Daddy had anything to do with it. We can actually harness some of these things like hypnosis, like chanting, like dancing, like music in general to affect and change our consciousness in some very fascinating and beautiful ways. And I think that oftentimes the atheist community, rightly so, is very skeptical of that kind of stuff and can potentially miss out on the beauty of, not just music, but actually like the transformative power of some of these practices. Is that fair at all to say?
I think so. I do. I think there is I think it might be a pretty common thing for people who are kind of coming out of religion or just have been impacted negatively by some other people's religiosity to want to veer as far away as they can from that stuff, right? And just to kind of keep yourself on the outside of ever looking foolish or something, or ever thinking, and like it's not really, if you're just looking at the mechanics of how our brains work and how our bodies work, and if we're looking for even evidence-based things, like there's research into this about how these kind of music and different kind of therapies are really impactful and helpful for people. Or just it's not like a rational necessarily like 1-2-step program, like it's a different kind of, you have to allow yourself to be open to a little bit of experience with that. And I understand the idea of not wanting to go there at all. I think I spent a whole year after I officially called myself an atheist in the mirror and freaked myself out. I think I probably spent about a year before I actually even listened to any music. Because for me, I was somebody who had some religious trauma, and I actually found all music pretty well triggering for a while. So I just couldn't.
I hear that.
I spent a whole year. The only time I ever had headphones on, I was listening to a podcast or an audiobook, and I was just trying to continue to figure out what the hell happened and why it's a lot of that kind of psychoeducation, and even just listening to books about the history and religious scholars trying to figure out what was going on. Could not listen to music. And so for me, I had to go through a little bit of healing of the religious trauma before I was able to enjoy music again. But now I'm 3 years out, and I'm like, wow, I can like totally enjoy music. I can accept that something's happening and it's not scary or weird, or like I'm not thinking it's magical. It's just this cool kind of perk to being a human.
Yeah. I mean, I think we underestimate how what we had for lunch, or how tired we are, or how much traffic we've been sitting in, or what the frequency of the lights that are above us are at, how much that actually changes our consciousness, affects not just our mood, but our perceptions. And by like pretending that that's not going on and being sort of hyper rational, we miss out on our opportunities to maybe tweak some of those things, to take ownership and responsibility for the way that we experience the world. So yeah, I am absolutely fascinated by some of these phenomena.
Yeah, me too. It looks like we've got our callers up and running now. We had a
phones are working. Let's do it.
All right. And I mean, we've been talking about it for the last little bit here, partly because we had this call. We've been waiting to talk to them. So let's talk to Zach from Arizona. Zach wanted to talk about the psychedelic study from Johns Hopkins. People experiencing higher power while tripping during the study.
Hi,
Zach.
Tell us about it. Doing all right. Thanks for calling.
Great. What do you want to talk about today?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting that you bring up psychedelics as a pathway to God, because I had a similar conversation on the show with Kelly Laughlin and Objectively Dan, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And the basic idea of this study was that they polled people who had psychedelic experiences, and they found that of the atheists who had an experience with a higher power or what appeared to be some kind of God entity, that there was a pretty significant change in belief. And I'm just interested to hear what your take is.
I need to know more.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, it's hard for me to like really weigh in based only on that. When I saw on the call screen notes that you wanted to talk about like John Hopkins and psychedelics, I was really curious what you were going to come with, because they've been doing some really fascinating research. I can say sort of broadly that I am aware of some studies that sort of touched on personal experiences with psychedelic and different people's sort of reactions to notions of higher power and angelic figures and things like that. But without knowing a little bit more about what you're asking, it's hard for me to really know where to go or what to say here.
Well, yeah, I could probably clarify a little bit, but they've been doing research for a long time. And one thing that I found particularly interesting about it is that they're finding that the part of your brain that identifies with your sense of self can be muted while you're on psychedelics. So
right, yeah,
it gives you maybe a capacity to see things beyond yourself, or to, as you say, dissolve your ego. So, I mean, I could,
that kind of notion, like Huxley's reducing valve, the idea that like sheer consciousness or experience is just flowing through you, and your brain is here maybe not to create that consciousness, but rather to like receive it and let it pour through. And that by taking psychedelics, you can sort of turn off some of those pieces and just get more unfiltered experience. There does seem to be some interesting research kind of supporting that notion. Certainly, I don't believe for a second that, I mean, I definitely believe that consciousness is constructed by the brain, in the brain, not just the brain actually, but our entire nervous system. And I think that sort of physicalism is a necessary prerequisite for really understanding the science of all of this. But just to say, damaging or maybe temporarily muting aspects of our neurobiology in order to sort of see what happens when we start fucking with different pieces of it is absolutely fascinating. And it does seem to give us some interesting insights into the parts of our body that help us to have a sense of like, well, is this my hand, or is this just a hand? Is this just an object in my field of vision, or is it something I have control over? And what is the nature of the self? I mean, there's some interesting questions being asked and answered.
Yeah, and I had a really similar experience I have a very limited experience with psychedelics, but my experience with psychedelics and with really deep meditation, I found kind of a similar overlap with that kind of dissolution of self.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that maybe our perception of self is the limiting factor that prevents us from experiencing God.
Yeah, all right. I mean, I think that's a interesting notion. I would then have to really start to scratch the surface on, okay, so what is a God? What does it mean to experience that God? Why does God need to have part of our brain turned off in order for us to experience him? And is that a good thing that we're doing that? But whatever the barrier is, I have a hard time believing that psychedelics are somehow like a key that allow us to maybe access the supernatural when there's no real reason to believe that there is a supernatural. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. And I've struggled with it myself. It's interesting that Erin brought up kind of this whole idea of Holy Spirit through music. I had that similar experience. I'm an ex-Christian. And by watching like Atheist Experience in this show, I've kind of gone down the path of moving away from organized religion. Because I do agree with you guys that there's a lot of say, manipulation there.
Yeah,
in
and
kind
some
of
of it,
how
I
people
should say,
emotionally
is
perceive it.
knowing and intentional and sinister, and we should absolutely decry that. I think the vast majority of it is sort of incidental and unknowing. I think that
Mhm.
not all, but probably most worship ministers that are standing up on that stage playing exactly the right chords over and over and
Right.
over again are not trying to like twirl their mustache and trick anybody, but it ends up having that effect.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on. I'm actually from Arizona, so interestingly, there's this animal, the Sonoran desert toad. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it.
Yeah.
I'm not.
It's-
I'm
I
up
mean,
here
I
in
mean,
Canada. I need a little.
I'm
I need a quick
assuming we're
recap.
effectively getting to DMT. Is that sort of the question
Okay.
that we're
and
asking?
So what I think, yeah, what's really interesting about this particular type of it is that people, when they explain the experience, they say it's like being shot by a rocket into the middle of all of experience,
Mm.
like the
Mhm.
source of everything. And they say it completely eliminates their sense of time, of self, of place.
Mhm.
And so when you talk about like what would a God look like, I've kind of entertained the possibility that maybe God got bored of being aware of everything and wanted to experience a limited mortal life. And that's kind of this idea.
Interesting story.
Yeah, and
But why?
Yeah,
Like-
that is a pretty common kind of line to kind of go down, especially I find in the kind of the spiritualist kind of, or I don't even know how to like frame this, but like people who are not part of organized religion, not necessarily spiritual, but they have this idea of something greater than them. I think that is like a really common kind of like, it's kind of like this process of deduction or what, you know, you're like, oh, my experience felt timeless, so maybe God's timeless, or my experience felt like bigger than me, so maybe God is everything. And I think that like Christy just said, but why, and why is it so different for everybody? And I think
Like-
I wonder sometimes if people have been given like almost like a part of the education program around this, not that there's a program or an organized one, but is the framework kind of going into it? Like when you have an experience, you're going to frame it probably within your experience of how to explain something.
Mhm.
So I often hear those kind of comments coming from ex-religious or ex-Christian people. So they've heard kind of in church that God is, you know, all loving, all knowing, timeless, and so that's how they can kind of interpret this framework that they still have, even if it's kind of a latent Christianity kind of framework that you still have in your head. Is it possible that you're still framing your experiences in something that is familiar to you in that, rather than just being kind of open to the idea that we don't really know what it is, other than the things that we do know? We know that it overrides kind of this default mode network that you have in your brain, and we know that it outcome of it is, you know, sometimes a reduced anxiety or a better acceptance with, you know, the things that give us anxiety, the things that are unknown about this world. For some people anyway. Other people, it might stir up anxieties about, you know, there's a lot that I don't know, and it's going to cause them anxiety. But do you think that is part of what it is, the framework that you're coming from, of why you would even go to a God in the first place?
Yeah.
Why not, and not like, you know, other interdimensional alien being that's talking to you or giving you experience?
I mean, I'm not going to rule out anything. I'm trying to be as open as possible, but I think you're right, though, when it comes to the perspective of I'm still influenced by my Christian background, and I think I have a lot of fears and anxieties tied to that, like the fear of hell and judgment and stuff like that. So I think one thing I'm really struggling with right now is, like, if there isn't any kind of anything greater than us, and, you know, this is a one-shot deal, that does kind of give me a lot of fear. So I think I can acknowledge that a big part of the reason why I still believe has to do with absolutely, you know, wishful thinking. So,
I mean, existential dread is part of being a human being. You know, Irvin Yalom, one of the greatest psychologists of sort of the modern era, basically worked out that there are 4 essential questions that every human being is going to have to struggle with on some level in their life. You know, the reality that all humans are separate, and so we're therefore alone. No matter how intimate or how much we love people, we're still individuals. The fact that life has no meaning except for the meaning that we sort of construct and decide to make for ourselves, and the fact that everybody is going to die is one of those issues. And everybody on some level is either in denial of that fact, or has made peace with that fact, or is in active fight with that fact. And it makes sense that you would want an answer for that question. It makes sense that you would want to have some sort of way to check off that box so that you don't have to worry about death anymore. I just would encourage you to look for answers that are true, that are real, that we can find some evidence for, rather than questions that just sort of like fill in the blank without really doing anything to acknowledge the reality of the situation.
Well, I think I can definitely acknowledge that. And I would say, to respond to that, that it's not necessarily that these things are, grasping at straws. There's a lot of commonality to the experience. So I think if we were all having these crazy different experiences that didn't converge in any way, that would be one thing. But I think it's interesting that a lot of people have a really common experience, not just with psychedelics, but with meditation, with near-death experiences. And I don't think we're ever going to answer this question. I mean, we could go back and forth on it for a while, but I think the biggest conclusion I have is that I'm certainly open to the possibility of it. And I think it's really interesting that for thousands of years, we've been having these mystical experiences. It's tough for me to ignore them and to say that they're just a delusion, or
let's not ignore them. No, I definitely want to take them
either.
I want to take them very seriously. I just want to be mindful of the conclusions that we draw from them. The fact that these mystical experiences, as you're calling them, which is a valid term, by the way, the fact that it has such a profound documentable impact on people's psychology, on people's experiences, on their relationship with death, on their personality, oftentimes, there's absolutely a lot there to be interested in and curious about. And yes, if turning off that part of your brain that is sort of responsible for the self, I know I'm oversimplifying, but if we can temporarily dislodge or turn that off and witness sort of a different way of experiencing reality, and then come away from that with our eyes opened and a sense of like awe and wonder at the beauty of life and existence, fan-fucking-tastic. Yeah. What does Jesus have to do with it? And even if we step away from traditional religion and just say the vague notion of a God, why? Like, where is that coming from? For what purpose?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that kind of strikes me is that, we're this amalgamation of atoms that come together for like just an instant of time, just a brief moment on this speck of dust, as Carl Sagan called it. And it's kind of crazy, even without any kind of supernatural, for me, just kind of conceiving of it, the vastness of it all. I think it does lend itself to something more, but I totally get where you guys come from the perspective of, I'm not going to believe anything until I have, absolute evidence or just really, really good reason to believe.
Yeah, I think one thing that we're kind of advocating for is to find this kind of happy medium where we say, we're open to talking about these things, because the reality is we don't have solid answers for a lot of it. But let's, have some restraint on what we attribute to the experiences. So, and like look with some anticipation and some hopefulness about maybe what's coming up about the usefulness of psychedelics and maybe like therapy and things like that. So I think it's good to keep yourself open, but, be careful with what kind of idea you latch onto about what is explaining what's going on. Because I mean that like Christy said, it's tempting to try to fill in those gaps with something that not only kind of answers the question, but also something that feels familiar to us. So, but a lot of what you said today is really relatable, honestly. Yeah. So,
And with these shows, that's what I learned. I learned to not take anything for granted, to question everything, to be willing to change your mind. Because I think when you have a conversation with someone and you change your mind, there's like a real benefit to that. Like,
Yeah.
for a while,
it's a humbling experience too.
It was really
You want to
calling in the atheist experience and talking to Matt and getting shot down.
It's a different kind of ego death, right? It's
Right?
a different kind of ego death.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Zach, you talked about changing your mind. I know we're
let you guys get on the next call.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I know we're ready to talk to other callers, but I guess I just want to mention How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan or Waking Up by Sam Harris as really interesting works of literature that are well researched, that touch on so much of what we're talking about here, and that I think might give you maybe the scientific credibility, maybe even just the big enough numbers and the statistics to begin to maybe pull back on some of those things that you're looking at. So I hope that's helpful. Thank you so much for calling.
How to Change Your Mind, Michael Pollan, and what was the other one?
Waking Up by Sam Harris is just one that I recommend. Erin talked about finding a middle path between like pseudoscience bullshit and maybe like hyper rational, we can't even look into any of this stuff. And Sam Harris does a great job of sort of laying that out.
Yeah, and it's controversial in a few things that Sam Harris has been in the last, recent few years. His experience with psychedelics is also an interesting one to listen to. I think you can find it on YouTube. He will talk, I think it's like a 15-minute story of his own experience trying psychedelics for the first time. It's a fascinating listen, and I recommend if you're, we've had this whole conversation, I think you would probably benefit from that as well. So maybe check that out too.
I really appreciate it, Erin. Thank you. And Christy, I enjoyed it.
Have a great night. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much for calling in, and hopefully we talk to you again soon.
Yeah, bye.
Bye. I wanted to use that as maybe a quick jumping off point before we get into the next call.
Yeah.
Christy, what do you know so far about the upcoming research about psychedelic assisted therapy? Because that kind of seems like
I mean, that's a huge question.
Yeah. In 2 minutes, please.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, so I actually am a psychedelic assisted psychotherapist, I guess you could say, in that we have tons and tons and tons of research showing that psychedelics can be used as a form of evidence-based practice. And there are obviously really complex geopolitical, tug of wars. Much of the research around psychedelics was shut down for a very long time. Thank you, Timothy Leary, because of sort of the mad rush that people were experiencing once these substances were made readily available in the West. And so now in the past maybe 10 years, we've started to see a lot of fascinating studies done on psilocybin and MDMA that we're very curious about and that we're not necessarily ready to like roll out nationwide. But there are other psychedelics like ketamine that are used pretty routinely in therapy offices that are absolutely worth our consideration. Erin, to I guess try and answer that question with the 15 seconds I have remaining, I'll only say that there is a lot of power here because many of these compounds have the ability to take the incredibly complex system of our brain and just fuck with it a little bit. By turning part of it off or by like pulling on one particular string, we can begin to have a better understanding of our mind, and not just like the mind from a, larger scientific standpoint, but a personal experience standpoint of, oh, well, maybe this is what it would feel like to talk about my trauma without being terrified. If MDMA can give me the opportunity to process some of these emotions without just gut-wrenching terror in my body the entire time, maybe I can begin to do some work around some of these topics. If psilocybin can give me the opportunity or the ability to maybe consider a new path or to look at things differently, because neurologically, the main street, the road that I'm always on, the thought patterns and the ruts that I've gone over and over and over, Well, if I close those off to myself and I'm forced to be curious and creative, maybe I will come to a new insight. So I don't mean to say everybody needs to just go home and recklessly do illegal drugs. That is
No.
not in the least bit what I'm suggesting. But there's real power here that can be very healing. And when done appropriately and responsibly and with the help of a licensed professional, there is a lot that we have been maybe afraid of as a culture that I think we should be exploring.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I don't know where I'm at on the timer. That was probably much longer.
I wasn't actually timing.
Hopefully that's my PSA.
I know it's a big thing coming up right now. I've kind of kept an eye on the research of it, and I know that it's like Christy said, we are not suggesting that people run out and go try things. Like there's obviously some protocols and some weeding out people who are not good candidates for it. So we're not, be mindful of that. That's not what we're saying, but it is really cool to see
how you use it, right? Like you can't just hand somebody a drug, right? There's got to be a strategy for how that's applied. Yeah. Set and setting. I mean, so much that we could get into.
And I would think that as we go down that road of understanding the framework for the most beneficial kind of use for it, we'll understand more about priming and things like that too with the brain and like,
oh, absolutely.
And like that might give us more answers about the religious experiences people are having in these charismatic kind of church services as well. So just it's a kind of a stay tuned kind of thing that I'm definitely keeping a close eye on because it's fascinating. So thank you for answering that question. So for everybody watching, just so you're aware, we are now accepting super chats and we will read them live on air. So feel free to make us read the things you've written, assuming they are YouTube appropriate. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by donating to the Patreon, as we mentioned earlier. There's a couple of different tiers there and you get your name shouted out during the show if you donate, like we did earlier. You can also support the show by becoming a member. You get emojis in the chat, your name gets highlighted in the chat, and you will be immune to the slow mode, all for as little as 99 cents a month. So those are some great ways that you can support us in what we do here and having these conversations. Christy and I are both volunteers. We do this out of the kindness and love for this all from our heart. So it does take a pretty big effort from a big community of people to make these shows happen. So any kind of support that you can provide is very, very much appreciated. And we'll jump into some more calls because that was a really good and interesting call. We have many more to get to.
I'm starting to worry that when I don't do a show every single week, some of this gets pent up and I get excited and it's like, hey, you asked me a question. Let's go. So I'm a little settled in now. I'll promise to be a little more gentle with the next caller.
Oh no, it's great having you here. You're good. Okay, so let's jump into our next call. Let's talk to Tim. Tim is calling in from Texas, and they have called in before to talk about dreams. Tim, what would you like to talk about today?
So last time I called in, I said I had 3 dreams. Three dreams that are so real you confuse them with reality. And these are actually my own personal dreams that I like to share with you guys. I called in, it was a while back, to tell one, and now I'm calling in to tell the second one.
All right. Can you do it in 2 minutes, just like Christy just did on that huge topic that I made him recap in 2 minutes?
Maybe. We'll see.
Okay.
So this story starts out, I'm probably like 12 years old. My mom and my grandma are in the kitchen, and I am currently awake at this point, but it is late. My mom tells me it's time for me to go to bed, so I go off into my room, and I go, for whatever reason, I don't close my door. And my room is kind of a mess. It was like I kind of started cleaning it, and I kind of started vacuuming, and then I put the vacuum down, forgot about it. Now it's just laying in the middle of the floor. But whatever. I climb over that, and I lay down in my bed. And what feels like not even 5 minutes later, I just hear this voice, help me. And I get up from my bed and I start looking around. And I can still hear my mom and my grandma in the kitchen, and they're playing cards, and I can still hear them talking. And I'm looking around my room, and okay, I guess maybe I just thought that, I don't know. So I laid back down, and again, it was like not even 5 minutes later, I hear it again, help. And so I get back up again. I'm looking around, and but I'm still hearing the voice. And so I'm just like, okay, I'm slowly getting out of bed, kind of walking around the room, trying to figure out where the voice is coming from. And I have this like drawer type deal. It has like a closet kind of where you can put clothes. I don't know how to explain it really, but I hear the voice coming from that closet. And so I go and I open up the door slowly and I look in, and there's Chucky standing there with a knife, and he's looking at me, and he says, "I get you now." And he goes to jump on me. I turn around, I go to scream. I cannot scream for the life of me. I go to run, and I trip over the vacuum, and now I'm trying to claw my way to the open door. I turn around, Chucky's now clawing his way up my legs, and that's about when I wake up, and I'm in my bed, and I'm looking around, and I can still hear my mom and my grandma in the kitchen playing cards. I'm looking around. Okay, that was just a dream. It's just a dream. And then I go back to sleep. But I tell you what, I goddamn tell you, I felt like that was real.
So the point of your story is that everything that you just depicted felt more real than real. It was like you could physically feel this Chucky clawing at your leg and all of that. I think, is that what you're saying? I think we've all had that experience one way or another, right? I used to have dreams. I won't say what it was like, but it was me basically being at work still. Like I would go to bed and I would be really tired. I had a long week. It's like Friday night or whatever. And I'd go to sleep, and I swear for 9 hours or whatever, however much I slept in for the next day, the whole time I was still working, and I woke up and I felt like I had no rest. And like I had like these very vivid memories about working even though I was sleeping, and I remember feeling like really ripped off because that was supposed to be my sleep, but here I was working.
In high school I had that issue. Like I remember waking up just like pissed that I wasn't on the clock.
And I mean, I've had other experiences where I've been in bed and I roll one way and then I roll the next way, and it's like when I rolled this way it was nighttime, when I rolled that way it was the morning. I didn't have any dreams, and I felt again like I had no sleep. I think everybody has weird stories about dreaming. I have lots of stories about, like, kind of because of the framework, again, that I was raised in, stories of having like demons on my chest, and like I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't speak, and I had to like somehow say the name of Jesus, but I couldn't because obviously I'm asleep. So being stuck in like this mode of just terror for like however long that lasted. Everybody's got stories. I think my understanding is just that, I mean, our minds, like, there's a spectrum, basically. It's not like you're awake and you're asleep. There's a spectrum of, being awake and being fully asleep. And throughout the night, even, you kind of transfer along this spectrum. And I think a lot of these stories happen for people while they're kind of transitioning into that sleep, right? So they're somewhere on that spectrum, not fully awake, not fully asleep. They're somewhere in the middle. And I even had mentioned earlier that I kind of played with that spectrum idea for a while, tried to like get into lucid dreaming, and I've had many lucid dreams, and those are weird. So I think it's not so much of like an on-off thing, and we can have these things where, your senses are engaged. I mean, like, think about even like where we're going with virtual reality and things like that. Like there are ways that your mind can be kind of tricked into believing that something's very real, and you can have the sensation that you're about to fall off of a cliff and things like that. So, I mean, I don't think there's much else there to really explore unless you have something else you want to talk about. Other than the brain is super weird, and we don't always have a clear turn on off point when we're falling asleep, as evident by everyone's stories they have like that.
Co-signed. Yeah, I'm on board. How does that land with you, Tim?
That's good.
I mean, the Chucky thing's terrifying.
School, or I'm in high school and I'm just like, well, what's my schedule again? Oh crap, I don't remember my schedule. Like,
oh yeah.
So that's all I wanted to do. I just wanted to call in to tell you that one, and I'll call in again sometime in the near future with the next,
all right,
the last one.
Well, all right, so we'll be waiting in anticipation for the third and final dream. And thank you for calling in. We'll talk to you again.
Yeah, take care.
Thank you, guys.
Bye. And
Yeah.
you know what's weird about my brain is because you brought up Chucky, I might have a dream about Chucky tonight.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, you were
Right?
talking about priming.
Yeah.
Just to agree with you said about sort of, I guess, the spectrum of sleep. I think, we could think about sleep as a handful of processes. There are so many different sort of switches that are getting flipped, and they aren't always all flipped in the right order or at the
Yes.
right time. And I know, again, we're oversimplifying, but like that sleep paralysis experience and some of those things come from being not just like 50% asleep, but maybe like asleep, and then, oh no, your brain forgot to flip that one particular switch around. Like maybe your body is asleep and unable to move, but your mind is awake. It can be kind of scary space.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's things I've discovered even like now. I used to have that a lot, and I think some people are more prone to that, like the sleep paralysis thing. You'll talk to certain individuals and they'll have like horror stories about going through that every night of their lives.
Yeah.
Like, as I would say that happened to me several times a year. It was enough that I have like a pretty clear, like when I think about it, it was really scary. And especially because of my framework, because of my priming, to me, it was absolutely demons,
Yeah.
For other people in different cultures or different religious like kind of backgrounds, it might be something totally different. But the thing
Isn't that
is
remarkable?
similar.
Whether we see a like a Renaissance demon
Yeah, it
or
could
like
be a
a
fairy or
djinn or
something,
a
right?
fae or yeah.
So, but I mean, again, we're talking about this like this common human experience that we have. So I think the thing that we know about this whole thing is that your brain does kind of weird things as it's falling asleep. And sometimes it's like freaky and whatever, right? So yeah, I look forward to hearing what Tim's next story is, and I will also update whether I have a dream about Chucky tonight, because that is kind of how I am. By now you know that the Truth Wanted store is up and running again, and this month is special. We're bringing back the top 3 designs as rated by the fans for the month of May only. If you missed out on getting one of these before, here's your chance to get them. But hurry, they're only around till the end of the month. You can even get 10% off your purchase by using the code FAVORITES at the checkout. Visit tiny.cc/merchaca to get them now. And if you want to hear our content in audio only form, please go to tiny.cc/AEN podcasts for all the latest ACA shows. And I took advantage of this one today and actually over this last week because I was doing a landscaping project in my front yard because I think I can do anything. And I caught up on all the shows that I've missed over the last few weeks because life has been busy. And it was great. I was able to just kind of flick through the different shows, and now I feel all caught up and I have a sunburn. So thank you. Thank you, AEN podcast. All right, so let's get to our next call here. Let's keep up with our topic, I guess. Let's talk to Brant from Wisconsin. I'll let them talk about their call. It's to do with psychedelics again, as you can imagine. Hi,
Fair
Brant.
enough. Let's do it.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Great. I'd love to hear what you are calling in about tonight.
Yeah, the first guest that I heard, I joined a little bit midway through, was talking about his experience with psychedelics and how kind of connected with God, I guess. I've ego deathed once on a strong psychedelic related to DMT called TPT for over an hour and 40 minutes, according to my trip sitter. And I don't believe in God. I don't believe in anything necessarily supernatural. I'm a physicalist.
So what did you think of that?
I don't know. I think it's really odd how people just have these mystical experiences and just automatically come away with the conclusion that there's something outside of just a hallucination, or like they see like some type of deity. Like I've seen some giant chrome owl thing that has like gem eyes or whatever, but I didn't think it was like a god or anything. I just assumed like, oh, that's a pretty cool hallucination,
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that is a powerful sort of measuring stick for, I don't want to say what kind of person we are, but maybe how we're thinking or where we're at in our life, what our mindset is. When we see something that we don't understand and just sort of label it like, oh, well, yeah, it must be God. It must be magic. It must be supernatural. Just how boring is that, right? Like to let the curiosity stop there and to not think, oh, well, what does this say about how our brains operate, how our brains maybe could operate, or trying to just better understand what the hell is going on inside of our bodies. What is consciousness? Where does it come from? How can we play with it? What can we do about it? To just leave it and mark it up as like, well, God must exist is just so uncompelling to me. I appreciate where you're coming from, Brant.
Yeah, no problem. One of my favorite theories involving psychedelics and like the origins of demons and ghosts and all that is it's like an evolutionary mechanism for plants to try to like attract us and scare us off away from certain locations, try to like spread seeds and stuff of that nature. And I find that one quite interesting. That or like digestive systems have like evolved to break down DMT, so it's no longer like processed anymore, but animals are just tripping balls at all times. But yeah, I'm glad I could come on the show.
Yeah.
It's bizarre to think about the way that some of these like plant defense mechanisms can sort of inadvertently lead to fucking with human consciousness and how that affects the evolution of a plant. Like the artificial selection of, well, when we boil these beans, they help humans stay awake. So let's just go ahead and plant coffee trees absolutely all across the planet instead of, the like small number of mountains in the Middle East that they were originally on. That's remarkable to me.
Right. It's like a form of co-evolution, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brent, I wanted to ask you, with your experience, even though you kind of went into this experience, you had this, pretty wild ego death trip kind of thing. Do you think that for you, having that kind of experience, if you didn't kind of go into it with that framework of that, how you were going to interpret this experience afterwards, can you imagine somebody in a different environment coming out of that experience and explaining it in totally different ways because of how real it feels? So if you were somebody who had grown up in I'm going to say Christianity because that's what I have the most experience with, and you didn't have this perspective of physicalism beforehand, and somebody just told you like that, did you feel like this, and that is the way that God's talking to you? Like how would you look at that and think, if you don't have the right framework, and I say right kind of loosely, if you don't have the framework to look at it in many different ways, how easy would it be to misinterpret that?
Oh, extremely easy. Like I was talking to some like Gnostic friends that I have, and they were like, yo man, you might have gotten in touch with like one of the
Oh, shoot.
Well, yep. That sound means that we will hopefully speak to Brant here in just a moment.
Yeah, we'll see if we can get them back. Basically, what I was getting to there is just like, I think about, for people who only have ridicule for people who are religious, and really can't get inside the mind of someone who's had a religious experience. I think possibly another use for something like this, if people can, go about this non-religious experience and maybe grow in a little bit of empathy for people who have had these mystical experiences in other ways too, about how it can possibly feel and how real it can feel, and why for some people who've had these mystical experiences, because there have been a lot of parallels. I am not saying that it's the same thing. I'm not saying that if you go trip on DMT, it's going to be the same thing as being baptized in the Holy Spirit, but I'm saying that there is some parallels that have been drawn. Yeah. How kind of a vulnerable state you're in when you're going through something like that. And if you haven't been given kind of the critical thinking framework to think about your situation, how easy it would be to be told by someone else who especially is an authority over you that what just happened to you means this. Yeah. And if you don't accept that, then something equally real will happen to you, but it's going to be really bad. Like just thinking about how vulnerable the mind can be for people, especially if they've been kind of sheltered in that one way of thinking for so long. That's kind of where I was going with that anyway.
Yeah, I mean, as a kid, I really did believe that I was seeing like halos around people when the Holy Spirit was upon them. And as an adult, I recognized that, Oh, yeah. If you make a kid just sit there and stare at somebody under bright lights who's framed against a white wall for like 2 or 3 hours while they just talk and talk and talk, you're going to start to see things.
Yeah.
That aura is not, anything magical. It's my eyes and my brain starting to kind of like fuck up because of how exhausted I am.
Right. I feel like we could go into another conversation if I'm just gonna like pick at your brain a little bit with your background about like also maybe some of like child development and things like that too, because so many people are introduced to their religious backgrounds as a child. And I could be wrong. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But that there is these stages, or there are these stages of development where people kind of live in this kind of mystical, magical world because of just part of their brain development. What do you think about the ethics of that if we were to have better understanding about children, say 4 or 5 years old, introducing them to these mystical explanations or like these religious explanations for the world when they may not even have the capacity to understand what's reality in their day-to-day life?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, really, just the ethics of talking to kids about religion is
Yeah, I know.
messy, and it's hard to even really sincerely talk about just because you are never going to be able, and reasonably so, but you're never going to be able to convince two parents that they shouldn't talk to their children about God until they're old enough to understand. But there is so much abuse that happens in that form. Telling a little kid that if they aren't able to successfully convert their friends, that their friends are going to spend forever and eternity in hell is deeply disgusting and incredibly traumatic. What to do about it? I mean, I guess if we move from ethics to like legislation or policy, I don't know that there are many options available to us other than just offering religious trauma healing and trying to work to provide alternative ideas.
Right. Yeah, it's a tough topic, right? Like we
For
can
sure.
recognize something without knowing what the hell to do about it.
Yeah.
I think we definitely need to also fight back against the whole school system thing where they're banning talks of like theories in quotes. What would they mean by
Right.
Sure.
theory of evolution, So
Yeah.
like the fact that they're taking out like essential theories to understanding like the nature of reality and how we've got to where we are, like alternatives to God. But especially given evolution kind of is like a big kind of debunker to like modern theology, in my opinion. Like the fact is like, why would God choose Homo sapiens, like, to stop there for the evolution? Like,
Right.
Well, I think
microorganisms and it's like Homo sapiens, yes, of course. I know you all are murdering and raping each other, but you're my chosen species.
you are my
In my
chosen ones.
image. In my image
think-
now, like the previous, millions of years of evolution and those iterations, no. Those weren't my children. But now that we've gotten to this Homo sapiens stage with its arbitrary cutoff, that is in God's image.
That's the one. I think that's a. I mean, it's pretty straightforward when you like take a step back from it all. Of course, they're going to try to legislate against that because, like you said, there are a lot of aspects of religious thinking that it knocks down. At least it knocks it back, right? There are people who can kind of harmonize those things, but in my experience, even the harmonized kind of versions are less harmful than the extremist kind of versions. So, I mean, it's clear as day to me why they're fighting back against things like teaching evolution and or teaching about current understandings about gender and things like that, because it totally threatens their religion. I mean, it's as much as I try to stay away from black and white thinking and stuff like that. It's pretty well black and white. Like it threatens them because it's incompatible. So. Anyway, Brant, I'm glad you came back to us. I wasn't sure if you were in with us here for very long, but did you have any other thoughts about what we're talking about? That's okay. I'm glad you're hanging out with us.
Yeah. I guess I'm an anti-theist. So when it comes down to it, I think that I agree with you that the extremists are a lot more dangerous than the average religious person. But I do think that there's a lot of as you kind of mentioned, religious thought can kind of taint ethical theories and stuff, and kind of limit discussion. And when it comes down to it, I as an antinatalist especially, I really think that like religion in general kind of propagates a lot of really dangerous ideas like natalism,
The quiverful
and really
movement,
like
the idea that we need to populate the earth, and yeah, there's a lot of problems there.
yeah,
Yeah.
indeed.
All right.
Yeah, that's all I really wanted to say closing out. But yeah, I think that in general, we should focus on tackling extremists first. But when it comes down to it, I think even just normal religion has a deep underlying darkness to it that has to be kind of taken care of in order to have proper ethical discussion.
Yeah, let's go back. Let's go after the biggest harm first, and then we'll work on the in between stuff, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Brent, for calling in and for hanging out with us and hanging out in the background for a few minutes while we figured out stuff on our end. Hopefully we hear from you again and have a great rest of your weekend. We do have a couple of things to shout out here. We have a super chat from I Got the Blues, which is kind of a sad
I dig
name.
that. Yeah. Oh no, I'm thinking more like Kraft macaroni and cheese, but maybe that's just me.
I have a song in my head over that. Super chat for $4.99. They say, I'm afraid to try psychedelics because of childhood and religious trauma. Is that a valid concern? Any advice to mitigate adverse effects? Christy, I'm going to throw that one over to you.
Yeah, first. Well, so I'm going to be really careful about giving anybody advice about taking psychedelics. That is definitely a decision with like some legal implications that you should be aware of in your area. But in terms of just the mental health component or how trauma can be a factor, I would say, yeah, you want to be concerned about that. You want to be very aware of how your trauma specifically shows up for you, but it's hard to really say much of anything beyond that. Psychedelics can be incredibly useful in helping to heal from that trauma. But again, it's not just the drug itself. You can't just take a pill and see that trauma like disappear. There are complex therapies and really complicated ideas that go into this discussion. So, I guess to try and answer that question very vaguely and very quickly, I'll just say, talk to a professional, do some research, read some good books, and do what feels right for you carefully and safely. But know that everybody who has ever done a psychedelic and had a positive experience has also had some amount of trauma in their lives. So there's nothing about you that is somehow unique or broken or incapable of having these experiences. And so whatever you choose to do from here, I would just say do so carefully, but remember that you're a person just like everybody else. And so there's nothing that humans do that you can't do.
And I mean, that's a great answer. And you have so much of the background here. I will just point you towards resources. I mean, for the trauma, getting with a good vetted secular psychologist or a secular therapist will be really, really helpful in that way too. So check out like the Secular Therapy Project to find somebody who's safe and who will help you navigate that trauma and maybe even help you kind of think through this a little bit more on a personal level and knowing your own background and your own trauma to help you come up with a decision in that area. So checking out them because they have great resources for therapy and people who are not going to try to reindoctrinate you. And then coming up next, we have a super chat from James Call, a member, for $10. And they say, as a young adolescent, I would have to tear down a beaver dam every morning. I would see a 6x6 fence post against some rocks. It looked like Bigfoot. I couldn't wait till the next morning.
That feels like a wild story that I need more details on. Like, that's too vague for me to really have the proper picture in my mind. So my imagination's running wild. Yeah,
I'm just thinking like that's so much work to do every day. Like every day you had to tear down a whole beaver dam. That sounds crazy. Goes back to the idea of my dream about where I was working all night. Just like you wake up exhausted in the morning. All right. Christy, we do have time for, I think we do anyway. Do you want to take on one more call here before?
Yeah, if you think we can sneak another one in, let's do it.
Okay. Let's talk to, actually before we get to the next call, because I think we're going to take some time with this next one. We do also want to, share with everybody that we have an event happening at the end of May. If you happen to be in the Austin area on May 28th, 2023, we will be broadcasting live from the Free Thought Library. Join us for Talk Heathen, hosted by Forrest Balkai, and the Atheist Experience will be hosted by Forrest Balkai and Jim Barrows. Doors open at noon, and we hope to see you there. So another great opportunity to meet people in the person and kind of start building that community. It's so good. I haven't, like I've said, I'm in Canada. I haven't been down to the library yet. And one day I will get down there. So you all in the audience who are local, please show up there. And I may show up one day. Also,
when you do make it down, beer's on me.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's huge on my list and top 3 things I need to do like soon or I'm gonna gonna lose it. I need to get down there. For anybody who is looking for a little more frequent atheist content, we do have the 24/7 live show as well for anybody who is just can't get enough of it. There is a live stream 24/7 of the Atheist Experience. So all of the great clips. And I would have really found this useful about 3 years ago when I was going through my process, because I wasted a lot of time looking up one by one the different episodes and different clips from the Atheist Experience, because that was really pivotal for me. So anytime you need a little boost or a little distraction from your day-to-day, or if you're doing landscaping like I was this week and you just need something to keep you busy up here, that's a new resource for you there. All right, so let's get to this last call.
Sure, let's do it.
All right, so we are going to talk to well, we've been given the name C.
All right.
From Pennsylvania. C would like to talk about well, they say transgenderism. So C, would you like to tell us?
That's a word that we're starting with. C, what's on your mind?
That's where we're going with this. C, how are you today?
Oh, well, how about yourself?
I'm doing great, thank you. What would you like to talk about?
All right. If you guys like hear pauses, it's a little delay, so
sure.
I'm still here in case. So first off, I like to ask, because I believe I heard I tuned in a little late. I heard Christy mention something about you're a psychologist, correct?
I'm a licensed professional counselor.
Oh, counselor. Okay, I'm sorry. So I heard you mention something about transgenderism earlier, and not too long ago, you guys mentioned about teaching about gender ideology in the schools. I just have a question. So, what is the basis for the legitimacy of somebody being transgender? Like, is it something that's biological, something that's mental? Is it just how you feel? Can I get a little clarity on that? You seem to be an expert in that field.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a messy question, but I'll just say that we are relying on a number of different data points. First and foremost, if somebody tells me, hey, this is a true fact about me, I'm usually going to roll with that. So broadly, yes, we are talking about self-identification, but we do have a number of different data points, a number of different ways of looking at sex and gender and trying to understand the corollaries between the two, and a lot of different interesting research to try and get at what are people describing. When somebody says, this is something about me, this is something about myself that I want for you to understand, we listen to them, but we can also do some pretty interesting studies on our brains, on our different developmental experiences, on our hormone levels, on a number of different things to try and understand what it is that they're describing and to try and find those corollaries. So I don't know how well that answers your question. I'm not sure I fully understand the nature of your question.
Well, I'm more of asking, so let's say, because I'm 30 years old, let's say I want to identify as a 10-year-old boy. Why would one be legitimate and another not be legitimate in regards to the trans issue? I'm male identifying as a female, because I don't know, are you
yeah, so you're using that word identify really just sort of loosey-goosey. So I don't even really know what you mean by it. When I tell people that I am a man, what I mean is that I see myself, I understand myself, I experience myself as a man. And so when I tell people that, they take it for granted that I am a man. When I tell people that I am a 10-year-old boy, people aren't really going to believe that for a number of reasons, the most significant of which being the fact that it would be impossible for a 35-year-old to be 10. So help me understand how that correlation connects.
Age is also not like a construct that we just hold socially.
It's empirical.
It's evidential. There's empirical, there's data, there's things that we can, it's a different kind of category altogether.
If I could weigh and measure somebody's gender, that might be a little bit better comparison, but I clearly can't. And so I'm reliant on these, less scientific, if you want to say that, measures. But when somebody tells me that they're a fan of this type of music or that they have a personality like this or that or the other, I take them at their word.
Okay. I'm just confused because I don't know if you support like any type of identification. When I say identity, I mean like identification. So, for example...
Wait. So you just defined identity by saying identification? I don't know what you mean, but I feel like what you're implying is that when somebody tells you about their gender, that they're just making it up or that they're lying.
Or that identity is just
off course.
Or that identity is just something that you speak out loud, which is like, I think Christy had mentioned already that the way you guys
just declare it.
Yeah, the way you're identifying identity, it's not just a thing. It's not just a bio that you put out. It's not just the words that you say out loud. Like when we talk about identity, it is a multifaceted thing that we talk about. There's many different areas that we're taking into account. Most people, when they're talking about their identity, it's an experience. It's the way they see themselves in the world. It's the way people interact with them. It's the way that they, portray themselves outwardly. It's the way they imagine themselves. Like there's a whole bunch of other factors to it. Saying the words out loud is a very minuscule part of someone's identity.
Right.
So I'm sorry, I need to interject because I don't think it is being come across as clear. I'm not saying identity in the way you guys are describing it. I'm just talking about gender identity. When people talk about being transgender, that's what they say. They say, this is my gender identity. So that's what I'm going off of.
Right, but why do they say that? See, I think that's the thing that you might be missing here. When I say that I'm a man, I'm not just saying it. Because if I say right now, oh, I'm a woman, that doesn't mean anything. It's just words coming out of my mouth. When I say that I'm a man, what I'm telling you about is the truth of my experience.
I understand that, and I mean I never made that statement that it's not something that you say. I'm aware that people that's what their lived experience is. I never made that claim that it's just something you say. I'm just pointing out the fact that
we're just trying to get a little more clarity on each other's definitions here. So I would say I'm curious on how you're using identity, but maybe a tactic would be to say like how are you identifying? If you identify as a man, what is the word I'm looking for here?
How do you describe yourself?
Can you describe, why do you describe yourself as a man? Like, what does that mean to you?
Well, I'm sorry. Before I answer that question, because I don't want to forget my thoughts.
Sure.
You guys mentioned that gender is a social construct. So race is something that I hear is also a social construct. So let's say I'm a black man. So let's say I wanted to identify as being white. That's something that I feel is my experience.
You're still, I have to pause you there because the whole I want to piece feels really disingenuous. You keep saying that it's not just the words that you say, but it's more than that. You don't want to identify as a man. You are a man, and then you tell people about it.
Also, we don't need to go into hypotheticals. I just asked you a very real question. Like, if you would like to share with us your gender identity, I would like you to explain to us why that is. So we don't need to go into hypotheticals about race or 10-year-old stuff. You tell me an identity, and I'm going to ask you why, and then we can talk about it. And that might be a better way to stay out of the hypothetical because, like Tracy said, like that seems a little bit more disingenuous.
I don't think it is because Rachel Dolezal is a person who actually experienced this. So it's not like it's a hypothetical. It actually does happen.
Yeah, but for the sake of this being my show and I'm asking you a question, can you tell me like why you would identify in one way or another? You tell me what you think being one gender is for you. If you identify as a man, and I have to admit, I'm honestly going based off of, the things that I'm assuming about you, unless you tell me otherwise. Why do you feel that way? Why would you mark down one box and the other when, you know, filling out a form or whatever? What does that mean to you?
And like Christy kind of like answered the question earlier. It's not a feeling. There's things that's objectively measurable. I don't feel like I'm a man. I am a man because there are things that make up.
How do you know you're a man?
Human makeup. Huh?
How do you know that you're a
I
man?
know I'm a man.
Yes.
Because there are things that objectively, like scientific,
like what?
point out the
Like
fact
what?
that I'm a man.
Just start listing them for me, buddy. Like,
Yeah.
come on.
Well, I mean, genetics is one thing. Chromosomes.
Okay, so you're talking about that XXXY dichotomy. We have debunked that 10 million times on secular sexuality. I guess this isn't that show, so I can't lean on that. And I'll just say, yeah, genetics are a lot more complicated than those two options.
Okay.
So what
It's absolutely
else?
possible to have ovaries and an XY chromosome set. It's absolutely possible to experience yourself and to present to the entire world as a woman and to identify as a woman, to be a woman, and to not have XX chromosomes.
And
So genetics, you can't just say genetics and like we'll move on. That's not the reality of a sophisticated understanding of human genetics.
So
But do
what else?
make the rule though?
I
Do
didn't quite catch
exceptions
what
I
you
didn't
said.
quite hear it either.
I'm sorry.
Do
I said,
exceptions
so-
make the rule is what he said, I think.
Yes.
I mean, you're the one who just
Yeah.
referenced Rachel Dolezal. What is that story? Like 10 years old?
It's a good one. It's a favorite.
Yeah, I have a hard time with do exceptions prove the rule. I'm not talking about any particular exceptions. I'm just acknowledging the incredible diversity of humanity and how you saying, quote, genetics is why I'm a man is kind of bullshit.
So, and also see, because I can't know your genetics, honestly, if I were to interact with you.
I mean, do you know your genetics? Have you ever had your
Exactly.
genome sequenced?
A lot of people come into certain parts of their lives and they, you know, they go their whole lives without knowing their genetics about like their total chromosomal breakdown. So I feel like it's a pretty mute point, and it is like it's not as strong as you think it is. If you really kind of get into the nitty gritty of it. So I would like to know your second best. If that's your first best, what is your second best point that says or that makes you know that you're a man?
I'm sorry. I just have to interject because you guys are saying just because you can't see your genetics, I mean, it's not a strong point. I mean, if I close my eyes and I'm
That's
in like
not the only thing that we said. No, that's not
one of the points that
the main point. See, we're going to keep going. We're going to be chasing our tails throughout this whole conversation if we kind of don't slow down a little bit. There's one question right now that's kind of on the table. We've asked you to explain to us why and how you know that you are a man. And so you said chromosomes. Well, we've got some, you know,
unless you've ever sequenced your DNA, you don't have that as an explanation of how you know you're a man.
Yeah, we've got some kind of feedback on that one. It's not super like it doesn't work so much for us. So maybe what's your second best evidence besides going back and rehashing the whole chromosome thing or DNA thing? What is like the next best one that we could talk about? And I did have you muted because we do need to hear each other if we're going to have a conversation. Otherwise, it's not a conversation. You're not muted right now.
Okay. Okay. There's a delay, so I'm trying to like talk and then you're talking.
Sure.
So that's why it seems like I'm not trying to interrupt you. But I think it's important because you guys are making statements and I can't like clarify what I'm saying. I think it's important.
Oh, we want you to clarify. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so like you guys mentioned that you can't sequence your genetics, you can't see your genetics. If I'm looking out in the street,
no, you can.
Well,
I'm just saying you haven't. Have you?
And most people haven't. And
Vast
most people go their
haven't.
whole lives not ever thinking about their chromosomes. That's all we were saying.
Wait, but one of you guys just said that it's a moot point. So regardless or not, if I sequence my genetics, it doesn't mean that I'm not a man. Just like if I go outside and close my eyes and don't see cars, doesn't mean
but if
there, you know what I'm saying?
If we can't see your genetics, we can't bring it up and look on it and share our screens and talk about it.
You can't use your genetics as an explanation for something if you don't know your own genetics. So let's move on to number 2. What's the next one, please?
I mean, those would be I don't believe in gender. I believe gender and sex are like one and the same, correlated. There's really nothing else I need to say because it's settled science. It's not like I'm not making up theories. It's
okay, well,
but that's not science. See,
no,
that's
you're
the thing
wrong.
that's gonna bother me. That's the thing that's gonna keep me up at night. Is you are just labeling it science without having read a science book. I'm telling you, that's like introductory freshman level stuff in every single field that has any touch on any of this stuff. You can call us and you can say, well, I'm curious because I have this problem, but you're not going out and reading books. You're not actually doing the research. You're not actually looking at the science, because if you were, you wouldn't be calling us with these questions. And I mean that. Like, I'm not trying to prove you wrong. See, that's really not my interest or my job here. I would really love it if you would actually read some of that science. Like, why is it that you wanted to spend your Friday night having this conversation rather than spending your Friday night reading about genetics, for instance?
I mean, I'm looking at something now. It's a SRY gene, and it's saying it's a gene that provides instructions for making a protein that determines sex. So I mean, you guys are saying it's not settled science, but I mean, it's a Medline Plus, a government website that studies genetics. So I'm just
that you're on a government website while you're having a phone call with us. Does that really sound like scientific research? Does that sound like really exploring and working to understand the universe? You're a stranger to me. I'm really not trying to embarrass you or talk down to you or be rude to you on any level. I have to just sincerely ask you, why is this conversation feeling useful to you rather than reading some of those books? Because I swear to you, if you read like any entire book about gender, you wouldn't be having these questions. You wouldn't be confused about these things. And our ability to, like, in a 15-minute period, explain them to you does not disprove that reality.
Okay, so see, before you say the next thing, I just want to reiterate. Christy's asking you, why is this call important to you? Why are you calling in about this? If it's clear to us anyway that we haven't quite gone down the research completely on both ends here. So why is this important to you?
I mean, I've done the research on transgenderism. I mean, I'm not an expert, but
you're using the word transgenderism. I know that you haven't. Like, you can tell us the internet can believe what they choose to believe, but I'm telling you, see, that I don't believe that you have read a book about this topic, any book about this topic. And you can tell me that I'm full of shit, that I don't know what I'm talking about, that you've read dozens of books, but you know the truth. And I have a very hard time believing you. Is that okay?
But that's an ad hominem attack, because books aren't the only information sources out there. You have websites, you have videos you can watch, you have scientists that talk about it. So you can't say that
it could be. See, we are just a little bit over time here. So I'd like to just leave on maybe this one last note. I'd like to recommend a video for you to go watch, and then watch the whole thing. It's 30 minutes exactly long. And then call us back and tell us what you don't agree with it. There's a video by somebody who is associated with the Atheist Community of Austin, by Forrest Valkai. He's one of our gracious hosts on Atheist Experience, and he is a biologist himself, and he's an educator, and he makes really good science videos. And he's got a great video called Sex and Sensibility. You can look it up on YouTube. Forrest Valkai, or the Renegade Science Teacher. I would like you to go watch that whole video and then call us back and tell us what you disagree about what he's teaching, because he's teaching the science. And then when you've done that, we'd love to hear back from you. Does that sound okay?
Go.
Pardon? Sorry, I did have you muted for a second so I could get that out.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be interested to check that out. But before you go, I mean, there's just one point I do want to address. I'm sorry, not one point. There's one question I ask you guys before you go. Again, you guys mentioned that gender is a social construct. Race is also a social construct. So why would I not be able to, like, if I have the experiences of let's say a white person, why would that not be valid? I'm just confused.
Because you don't
I
have
don't know
the
what it means to be the experiences of a white person. Yeah. Like,
because you can say that, but again, we're not talking about just what you say. We're talking about identity and what your experience is, and it's more than just that, which we tried to get to with you. You can't just speak things out and it be true. This is not science. This is not how it works. This is not even social constructs. Social constructs don't mean I say something, therefore it is. That's not what that means either. So it's speaking something out loud is not what we're talking about. We're talking about something much more complicated, much more, a deeper concepts than that. So I just don't think we're even on the same page, let alone seeing eye to eye on this conversation. So, and we are over time. So see, I would like you to go back and check out that video that I recommended. Please call us back. Let's get a little further in our next conversation and see if we can get somewhere, because I don't think we're getting anywhere tonight. But I do appreciate you calling in, and let's talk again sometime in the future. But I think that's it for us for tonight about that, because I don't think it's going to go anywhere after that. What do you think about? Do you get sick of those calls,
take care.
Christy?
I mean, to an extent, like I really do have compassion. And if I came across as a little bit too rushed or hurried, maybe that's just because I'm so excited and passionate about all of these topics. But to your point, like the United States of America is a social construct, right? Like we can't look at it under a microscope. We can't define the difference between Canada and America using anything other than our social contract and what we have like sort of understood
an arbitrary
to be true.
thing that we all decided that
it's just an arbitrary thing that we all agreed to. And me sitting here and being like, no, I'm not in Texas, I'm in Zervandia, doesn't actually mean anything. And me just declaring that I am a Black woman is bullshit on its face, obviously. That's not what we're talking about when we say that people identify as non-binary, identify as a man or as a woman or as any of these other kinds of ideas.
And one of the things I found interesting about what they had said, not that I'm not going to try to talk about them now that they're not here.
I hear that, sure.
Is like, what if I say I have the experience of a white person and they're Black or whatever? Like, I don't think most, like, again, with the straw mans, he said we were straw manning, or I think he said ad hominem or whatever, but I don't think that like that is what people are saying. Like when they come out as, being somewhere else on the gender spectrum, they're not saying like what they are being accused of saying. Like they haven't grown up as one way and have that as experience. They're saying that is what they're identifying with, and they're going to now transition into being more authentically who they feel like on the inside. And so I don't know. It's the language. It's so like the nitty gritty and like the reason why we get down to the language. I don't think we even got past what identity meant in that conversation. Sure. So I mean, that conversation is frustrating because I don't think we're on the same page at all, even right down to the most basic terminology, which is frustrating.
Yeah, which, is fine conceptually. It's fine on the blackboard. It only concerns me when there are, reliably on these shows, folks who are willing to forego their Friday night doing whatever it is that they might be doing to take up this particular issue that they haven't necessarily worked to understand for themselves. And again, I want to be kind to see and everything else, but I also want to be very like forcefully protective of this remarkably vulnerable minority that has become a thought experiment, an intellectual talking point, or frankly, just a scapegoat in a punching bag. And definitely a scapegoat for a lot of things.
Yeah. Right? It is hard. And we do have people in our own community here who do the exact opposite. Rather than spending their Friday night asking questions on a call-in show, they put themselves out there and are willing to answer questions. And so we have many people who are work with us here at the ACA who are open to taking your calls about it because they themselves are trans or whatever other part they have. Like, we have a lot of different people who on the show who are willing to talk about it, and they have, made that sacrifice to put themselves out there and sometimes be called all sorts of things online. So, I mean, let's continue to protect people. And if people want to have those conversations, there are people over on this side that are willing to have sincere, authentic conversations, but you have to do the research and you have to be on the same page.
Yeah.
At least somewhat.
Do your homework, put some intellectual effort into it. Yeah. These are important topics.
Yeah. Well, that last call was kind of off topic, but I mean, we went there and I knew we would, honestly.
Mhm.
It seems to be pretty common, but yeah, I think that wraps it up for our calls for tonight. Let's check on the last couple of things here that I want to tell everybody. Excuse me. For anybody who else is looking for community, we do have a couple different ways that you can connect with us. We do have a Facebook group. It's run by fans for the fans. Go to tiny.cc/FBTWG to interact with other fans. So just another fun way to kind of connect with other people who are also fans of the show, and good way to kind of share information and memes and that sort of thing. And if you've said, I'm sorry. It's getting late on my Friday night now. I already talked to you guys about the 24-hour show. That is a new feature, which I really, really love. Anyway, Christy, I think I'm done for the night. How are you doing?
Hey, I was just very excited to be here again. I haven't done this in too long, and haven't gotten a chance to just like info dump about psychedelics, which is maybe one of my favorite things to do. So I really appreciate the opportunity.
I'm so glad. I'm glad that you came on here, and I'm glad that we talked about this, because I also love talking about it and picking your brain about it, because I think you have a little bit more experience, especially on the therapeutic end, than I do. So I really, really appreciate you talking to us about that. Is there anything that you want to kind of shout out to the audience, or where they can find you, or maybe where they can get a hold of you or anything like that?
Yeah, well, sure. I'm around the web as Valence Counseling, if anybody's curious. But of course, if you want to kind of debate or continue any of these conversations, TV at atheist-community.org will eventually get to me. So if there's anything that you think that I said is stupid, I'd love to hear about it. Honestly, I would rather people point out when I'm wrong. So let me know, and let's have the conversation.
Definitely. And if you want to get a hold of us here at Truth Wanted, you can also email us as well. You can email us at truth@atheist-community.org, or reach out, like Christy said, if anything to do with any of the ACA programs, tv@atheist-community.org. Before we head out of here, I really want to take a moment to thank our crew. As I've mentioned, I think more than once on the show, it takes a lot of effort to make these shows happen. There are lots of things going on behind the scenes. So there's our crew Cam, there's crew Kitty, crew Cat. We literally can't do the show without them. We just can't. It's impossible. We need that Kitty, that little energy there. So that's our crew Cat for the night. Thank you, crew, for everything that you do, as well as our moderators and call screeners and our volunteers. And Christy, thank you for coming on as my guest tonight. It's been great having you. So don't forget the call or the question for next week's question of the week. TT, what is it? WWTT. The prompt is, what do aliens shame each other for? So put your answers to that in the comments of this video, and if we like your answer, we'll read it out on the next show. Christy, thank you for joining me tonight, and remember, everybody, to always keep wanting the truth. Nate.
Watch The Non-Prophets and join the hosts in the live chat, Sundays at 3 p.m. Central, between the Atheist Experience and Talk Hidden. Visit tiny.cc/YTNP.